Good day, everyone. My name is Travis Bembenek, CEO and owner of Mexico News Daily. Welcome to another episode of Confidently Wrong. I'm joined by my very frequently confidently wrong friend, George.
Hola, Travis. Buenos dias.
Good morning.
So, Travis, this week we're going to talk about Tulum. And there has been a lot of stuff in the media written about Tulum recently, a bunch of articles you guys have posted just in the past in Mexico News Daily. And there was an interesting article in the Tulum Times that was posted a couple weeks ago. And I like the Tulum Times. I read their articles a lot. And the title of their article was Tulum is bleeding in silence and no one seems to notice. And then the article goes on to talk about sort of all of the downfall of Tulum, from the collapse of tourism to skyrocketing prices, the Sargassum issues, the environmental impact issues of all the development, and just the social impact and local displacement, et cetera. And I found the article interesting, not only because of those reasons, but also because it was written by the Tulum Times, which is sort of like, you know, the heartbeat of Tulum. And,
Sure.
and you know, they obviously have a massive affinity toward Tulum, the Tulum Times. And, you know, for them to publish that type of an article means that, you know, there is something potentially seriously going on there. So
Sure.
I kind of wanted to talk with you about, you know, all those things that were listed in that article and, you know, get your opinion on it too. I know you've been down there, whatever, for 20 years, several times a year, and you love Tulum. But from an outsider, from my point, you know, I've been maybe twice in my life forever ago. And if I sort of believed all the stuff that I read, not just in the Tulum Times, of course, but if I just read all the stuff or believed all the stuff I read all over the internet, I would think Tulum is a frickin' dump and that I would never want to go. So
Sure.
let's talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, Tulum is really a hot topic across the country right now. There's no doubt, as you said, there's been a lot of negative ink written about Tulum recently. When I say recently, I'd say the last year or two. And I think it's important, you know, you mentioned that I have been going to Tulum for a long time. I actually got married with my wife about 22 years ago in Tulum. I've been going there for about 25 years, so I do have this special connection to it. But I'm not here to defend it, right? I'm here to really just kind of talk through sort of this evolution I've seen and really help people understand if they, you know, if they should believe these kinds of articles that you reference, how they should sort of analyze them and really help them think for themselves how to view Tulum and if or not they should plan on a vacation there or buying a home there or whatever.
So, you know, let's look at sort of each one of those topics that I brought up. You know, the first one, let's just talk about it real quick. The collapse of tourism, okay? And you guys, Mexico News Daily, just published an article like 2 days ago, and it was about the Tulum transportation workers, and they're reporting steep declines in tourists based on, you know, who's taking taxis and whatever. And I think the numbers were that ridership this year has declined more than 50%, you know,
Yep,
year
that's right.
over year.
We just
So
ran that last week.
Yeah, is there a collapse in tourism right now?
So, good question, and we're going to get to that for sure. I think let's just step back for 1 second, though, because you know, for those that haven't been to Tulum, or those that have been there recently but not a long time ago, or those that have been there a long time ago and not recently, I think it's really important to understand kind of the evolution of Tulum, right? So the way to look at the Tulum area, the Riviera Maya area, is to think first about how it began developing, right? So it really began with the Cancun massive investment 50 years ago from the federal government, pouring a ton of money in there, building an airport, building infrastructure. and the hotels started coming in, right? So before then, that entire coast was really just fishing communities and kind of hippies that would go there and hang out in nature. So it all started with Cancun about 50 years ago. And as Cancun developed further and further, more and more growth started heading down the peninsula, right? So then, of course, Playa del Carmen became the next the next sort of big thing, the big area that was undiscovered, where investment started pouring in. Playa del Carmen's population from 20 years ago to today has grown from 25,000 people to 250,000 people. Okay, so it's grown 10x. Just for some perspective, Cancun is now over 1 million people, right? So it's gone literally from almost nothing 50 years ago to 1 million people today. As Playa del Carmen continued to develop and grow, more and more people started heading south, another 45 minutes south and discovering Tulum. So Tulum, when I first started going there, literally there was almost nothing on the beach. It was some shacks, some restaurants,
it was beautiful.
Literally thatched roof places. And I mean, you could walk on the beach for miles and literally not see anyone. So it was, this sort of virgin, untouched paradise. The people you would see would be people camping on the beach or hippies, kind of hanging out there.
Okay, I get it. That's all great. We know the history, blah, blah, blah. It used to be teeny. Now it's huge. There used to be hippies. Now it's been ruined. Like, I get it. And I think most of the people get it. But thank you for the overly wordy brief history. So let's focus on right now. Okay, back to my initial question, which was, and this is just the first one, and we're going to talk about all of them, but is tourism, currently collapsing year over year because of the overdevelopment that you just explained?
No is the short answer. And again, if you would have let me go another 30 seconds, I would have finished the evolution. But
I couldn't take it.
In the couple years before COVID, Tulum started really picking up. More and more people were recognizing it as really a cool place. Investors were starting to build condos, hotels, restaurants, you name it. When COVID came is really, the moment that everything changed.
COVID ruined places all over the world.
Yeah, I mean...
But just meaning digital nomads going there and overpopulating it like they did in Tulum. I mean, the same thing sort of happened in Sailita, but I know exactly what you're talking about because I witnessed it here. Well, and now here we're getting back to normal too, so maybe tourism isn't collapsing, but maybe they just after COVID, they had 2 or 3 years of a complete boom, and now the numbers are just back to where they were right before COVID, meaning a normal year, but everyone, because they had 3 boom years after COVID, they think that's a normal year. Well, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tulum was, like the most booming place, right? So I spent a significant part of the first year of the pandemic actually in Tulum. And I saw people literally from all over the world coming there and spending months there. And there was a saying that there is no COVID in Tulum, and the point was everybody's outside, so that helps with social distancing. Most of the locals and tourists are very young, and so in general there wasn't the sort of concern for COVID that the rest of the world felt.
So then everybody flocked there.
The world flocked there, the world discovered it, the world started buying condos there, the world started, building condos there. And the tourism, it wasn't just a nice COVID boom. It literally went parabolic for, the year 2000, and it was already very steeply growing before the pandemic in 2000. But for another 3 years or so, it was as close as you could say as sort of unchecked, out of control growth. In every dimension. And then you add to that the federal government, so the previous, and we're going to get to all those problems in just a minute or two, but it's important to understand this context. The federal government prioritized this little town of Tulum, which, at 2000 had about 25,000 people. Today it's now well over 100,000. But the federal government began the Maya train project, which had Tulum as a major hub of the project. The federal government built an international airport at the same time, and the federal government decided to build a massive, national park there called the Jaguar Park. So not only did you have all this private investment and private tourism pouring in, but you literally had just massive billions and billions of dollars of federal government money also pouring into this town of what was then 25,000 people.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because, I've read a lot of articles about, that federal money dumping billions and billions into certain infrastructure, airports, the Maya train. And, that type of infrastructure brings more people in, but they also didn't focus on the other infrastructure that then with the influx of those people, you also need to have in place: water, sewer, CFE, electricity,
internet.
and, the influx of people, and systems literally just failed, which also, that's what I read. That's what we're here talking about. Sure. But, and then people, got turned off to Tulum because they couldn't keep up with those other infrastructure issues, not just the transportation, airports, and Maya train stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, we would say, and it wasn't funny, but it was sort of sad funny, that you could fly to, Tulum from Houston quicker than you could get from, the Tulum airport to your condo in Tulum, right, or your hotel. Because, you fly in super fast, beautiful infrastructure, and then the reality of where Tulum was kicks in. Still dirt roads, still potholes, the electric grid in no way keeping up with the amount of investment, the internet infrastructure, the water infrastructure, none of that was prioritized to the same extent as Fed. So think, private investment pouring in literally in the billions of dollars, federal investment pouring in at the billions of dollars, but state and local
doing nothing.
Didn't do their part, or maybe couldn't do their part quick enough, because if you understand the scale of what was happening, it was crazy. I mean, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that, tens of thousands of construction workers from across rural Mexico came into Tulum, to start working on all of these projects. So it was kind of this perfect storm that I think you're referencing, and we'll get into here in the kind of 2023, 24 time period, where people started saying, that these levels of investment are not happening consistently. So you have massive international airport and a dirt road next to it. That this sort of incongruent type of investment, and really causing a lot of, I guess a lot of frustration from people that would arrive there, a lot of disappointment, shock, and that's where some of these, these things you're talking about start coming in.
Right. So you think then that those everything that we've just talked about, the infrastructure, blah, 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 that has had a dramatic impact on tourism, the overall opinion of Tulum, the potential, I'm not going to Tulum anymore. I went last time, it was gross or whatever. It took me an hour to get to the airport, blah, blah, blah. But all of these things you're saying have had an impact on overall tourism.
Well, again, you got to remember the time zone.
Or not. Whether it's a tourism collapse, I mean, I think that's a little bit dramatic, but obviously it's had a pretty big effect on it, correct?
I think you have to think of time horizons here, right? So the article you're referencing on, the taxi service providers seeing a 50% drop, that is referencing, I believe, versus the prior 6 months, right? There was an article just a couple days ago saying that in the first 6 months of the year, the Tulum airport had double the traffic of the previous year. Double. Now, you could say, well, wait a minute.
Then it's like, well, what numbers do I believe? Because how could the airport numbers be double, yet the taxi, whatever, union numbers be half?
Well, and that's why what we're talking about here is so important, because so what started happening before the airport? You had to drive down to Tulum, and the taxis that were being referenced were these shuttle services that would take people from Cancun and Playa down to Tulum. That was the way you got there, or you rented a car. Now all of a sudden you have an international airport, dozens of direct flights coming in. People aren't taking that service anymore. They're
Interesting.
flying directly to Tulum.
I got it.
They're renting a car, or they're taking taxi services from the airport into the city. So again, it's easy to pick
Right.
and
No, that
choose,
makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
headlines and paint a picture. And you got to step back a little bit and really see the bigger picture. Now, that being said, the city is having major growing pains, right? The way I describe the sort of Riviera Maya coast to people is, think of, Miami, and then sort of Fort Lauderdale, and then Palm Springs, and just sort of heading up the coast. Imagine what that was 100 years ago, right? I mean, just sort of little settlements along the way. And imagine, and we've all seen it, the evolution that's happened in that part of Florida, right? Some people would lament it, some people would say it's progress, but at the end of the day, you had millions of people moving in, billions of dollars invested. It in no way resembles what it resembled 100 years ago. But it is what it is today, right? I think the way to look at the Cancun, Playa, Tulum corridor is in a similar light, and that may make a lot of people sad and say, well, but I remember the Tulum where it was literally jungle up to the ocean. That still exists, but there's no doubt it is in this growth phase. And I would say, to use a human analogy, maybe the teenager stage where everything isn't as pretty as it should be, and there's some acne and and bad dressing and bad hair and stuff like that.
Well, let's use that analogy. You're a teenager, you've got acne, you're a freshman, you smoke pot for the first time, then you start drinking, and then that leads to harder drugs, and then maybe you die in high school from an overdose.
Okay, that wasn't my.
Do you
my
think
high school.
Tulum potentially could overdose right now? I mean, I get it, the ugly teenager, but maybe this is more serious than that.
That's fair. That's a fair question. And I think part of what gives me hope that the teenager is going to get back on the right track is really the federal investment. The federal and the private
Which is
investment
massive.
in there. And again, this isn't federal investment of a highway, right? I mean, this is a $16 billion train network that, arguably is one of the top train systems built in the world in the last decade. The federal government continues to invest in infrastructure around that train. 2 of the stops are in the Tulum area. The airport was a massive investment. The Jaguar Park, if anyone has been to the Tulum ruins, and trust me, there's many people that say, man, I miss the old Tulum, just the laid back, chill Tulum. I do too, but it's easy to view the past with rose-colored glasses, right? When you would go to the ruins in Tulum, there really wasn't any infrastructure there. There were terrible bathrooms. I mean, you just kind of wandered around. Now, there was an Indiana Jones adventure kind of aspect to that. But now, but it was a little bit Wild West as well. There was some development encroaching on the ruins in the area. The federal government took that over 1,000 acres, and has turned it over and converted it into this national park with walkways, bike paths.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous. I get it. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. But let's talk about just the other problems, because I liked how you sort of broke down the difference in the taxi cab numbers and the airport numbers, because I learned something. You know what I mean? Sure. That's why we're here on this podcast, and I didn't look at it like that. So, that was cool. Let's talk about the skyrocketing prices. And I've heard this, not only read about it, but also heard it where, people have been going down there for 10 years, and now it is just so unbelievably expensive. Like, they'll get a menu and they assume it's in pesos because it's so expensive, but it's actually in dollars. And it's like it's just priced everybody out, and $1,000 a night hotels are a dime a dozen, and $12 to $15 coffees are the norm, and blah blah blah. So let's talk about that.
All right, so it's important to understand the real estate you're talking about with Tulum. On the north end, you have the ruins, right? So building and hotel infrastructure cannot go further north without being sort of in metropolitan Tulum. And to the south is another national park, Sian Khan, one of the most incredible, national parks in the Americas. So you've got this very limited real estate on the beach, really just a couple miles, and then inland from there. And it was the classic thing that happened, right? There was very limited supply at the beginning, and as the demand skyrocketed, and I'm referring there to the, sort of 2019, 18, time period. Yeah, I saw hotel rooms, very rustic on the beach, that used to be $100 going for $1,000 a night. That literally happened, and there were many that were even more than that. You saw taxis that were $5 to $7 to take you from the beach to town, or vice, back and forth. Sometimes charging $50. Literally, the bad joke in town was
that's
taxis
just
were more
greed.
expensive than Manhattan, and there's no denying that everybody got very greedy, very, very greedy in Tulum. It was, a gold rush of epic proportions. Everything, with some exceptions, you can still find, if you buy juice and fruit and vegetables and things, that's all affordable. But if you're going to the hot tourist places, it is literally Manhattan or higher pricing, or it was. And so greed prevailed. There was limited supply. There was incredible demand. And so what's happening now? Significantly more investments coming in, offering people more choices. There's more supply. I don't know what's going to happen, but if you understand economics, with so much more supply,
It'll balance out, or it
demand
should.
not growing as fast. I think that's going to settle out. I think a lot of people, for lack of a better word, took advantage of this boom.
Totally.
And now they're feeling some pain, because they got greedy. There's no other words for it.
Right. All right, good answer, I guess.
No, I think there's no denying, taxis continue to be a problem, right? I'm not sure if you're going to bring this up, but there are no Ubers in Cancun, Playa, or Tulum.
And that's
Ubers,
very sort of similar to a lot of Mexican towns, and I can explain sort of how it works here. I don't want to use the word mafia, so I won't, but there are typically a very strong taxi unions that work in these small towns around Mexico. And when Uber came in, in a lot of parts of the world, the taxi drivers got completely screwed. Whereas in Mexico, the Ubers came in and the taxi unions really bound together, and they basically prevented Uber.
In very few places. But Tulum is, I would say, ground zero.
Sayulita's one. Tulum, obviously. I don't know. I've been to several smaller towns where that's the case. Obviously not Mexico City, Puebla, Querétaro, San Miguel, blah blah blah. But yeah, I definitely experienced that, and that is certainly what happened in Tulum.
Without a doubt, a lot of families, I'm sure there was a very strong union. They benefited from, essentially price fixing on prices. But at the end of the day, the community failed to recognize, or the union failed to recognize, that we live in a world today where the first thing someone does when they land in an airport is open up their phone and order an Uber. Right? And so the initial shock that there is no Uber is sort of the first kind of jarring thing. And then the second thing, when you realize you have to take a taxi and the taxi charges you
more than your airfare
per mile, in some cases arguably close to the price of your airfare. The first impression of people in the first hour upon arrival is not a good one.
Yeah, that sucks. I totally get that. You land and you feel like as soon as you've landed, you've been ripped off immediately, and then it's just all those, just stereotypical Mexico comments. Oh, people rip you off.
You just get anxiety from the minute you land.
Exactly. That's bullshit. Yeah, I hate that, man. I hate that.
It's important to understand, unless you're a part of one of those taxi unions, the locals hate it too, right? The community is very clear in recognizing some of these problems.
Totally.
But they've been very hard to resolve.
All right, let's move on to another one. The one of the other big hot topics is the Sargassum and how bad it is, and what they're doing about it. we've had that problem, around the Puerto Vallarta area, not this year or anything like that, but here the local government is pretty good about cleaning that stuff up, and they have programs in place and blah blah blah. But it just seems like in Tulum, not only is the problem 10 times worse, but then the way that they're handling the problem, is also 10 times worse, exacerbating it.
I think the local government deserves and state, a lot of criticism for a lot of the things they've done in terms of keeping up with the federal and private investment. I wouldn't blame local or state authorities on Sargassum, or Sargasso. That is something that, maybe some people who've been going there for, 50 years would argue with me, but the first 15 years I was going to Tulum, the beaches were literally immaculate. There's nothing on the beach ever, any time of the year. And then, in the last 5 to 7 years, this started happening, right? And so there's lots of, first of all, it's important to recognize it's not just a Tulum thing. It is a Caribbean thing. It's hitting the Caribbean islands. It's hitting the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula. It's hitting Florida. It's a huge problem for all of these communities. Part of what makes it maybe, harder in Tulum is you don't have like a bay or a cove, where you can kind of manage it. It's just open ocean. And so this problem, there's lots of theories on how it's happening. I think the best one and most logical one I've heard is that as more and more farming is taking place in the rainforest in Brazil and more trees are being cut, there's more fertilizer being used. That fertilizer ultimately makes its way into the Amazon River and out into the ocean and then gets caught up in currents. And as that fertilized water gets into the warm waters of the Caribbean, it creates these algae blooms. So it's not the fault of any administration. They never had to deal with this before.
But do you think they have done a good job attempting to clean it up?
I don't. I think what they've done is admirable. It's an evolving thing. This year and the last few months have been the worst. And when I say worst, if you actually go and see it, it's a sort of a superhuman task to try to stop, tons and tons of this heavy, thick seaweed coming in waves on the ocean. So I guess I wouldn't look to blame the administration, the local or state there. I guess the bigger question is, what are they going to be able to do about it? So they're building, sort of sea buoys that block it out in the ocean. They have groups of people that are on the beach now with machinery scooping it up. If you just step back from Tulum or Mexico and just say from a globe perspective, it's scary to see that happening, that these beautiful, pristine oceans and seas and beaches for a few months of year are just filled with this. Now, last year it wasn't as bad. This year it's terrible. So
just curious for my education, I know in summer it's really bad. When does it sort of break up and move off? Is that November? Is that December? Or does it have to be cleaned up?
Corresponds to the warming of the Caribbean in the summer months. So sort of, May to September kind of. And it's not.
And then does it have to be cleaned up, or then does it move on with currents?
No, it just sort of stops coming. And again, so there's a constant cleanup effort. They haul it away, they bury it. There are some companies now coming up that are starting to use it for other purposes, even making bricks out of it for building. But it just sort of, it's this natural phenomena that sort of dies down as the waters start cooling off later in the year. So it's important to understand that is not something that is just a permanent fixture all year long. It is this.
No, that's why I brought it up. I wanted people to know.
Not every month, but there's no denying that when it comes on strong, it is catastrophic. To those that want to spend time on the beach. I guess I'd say one other thing, going back to my Miami analogy, if you go to Miami now, a lot of people don't go to the beach, right? There's so many other things you do. And your first instinct is, well, the only reason I'd go to Tulum is to go to the beach. But there is, part of the, I guess, positive side of all the sargassum on the beach is people are discovering all the other things that there are to do there, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you go back to the core of why people found Tulum to be this incredible place, of course it was the beach, but it was also the jungle. It was also the history and culture with the Mayan ruins there. It was also the cenotes and these incredible freshwater, underground swimming areas.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Last thing I sort of want to ask you about, and I just love this frickin' word, is let's talk about sort of the Tuminati. And, I want you to explain sort of what that type of person is. And then, has that type of person kind of ruined the vibe in Tulum? Like if you go there, is that the type of, whatever crowd you're hanging out in, and has that ruined it?
Let's start with the definition. Tuminati, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, Tulum started becoming big in the electronic musical festival world, right? They would have these big music festivals. And Tuminati refers to really the way people would dress and look and act. But I would say dress is the most thing. So it's these, flowing clothes, sort of hippie-like, wearing sunglasses even in the middle of the night, and just, having, all kinds of crazy jewelry.
Like you, a little bit.
A little bit like me, exactly. So, again, Tulum's, began with sort of hippies. Then it really became Europeans and backpackers, adventurous type that wanted to be in at one with nature. And then it became this sort of Tuminati, where literally there would be stores where you'd see a shirt that like, oh, this looks like a nice beach shirt, and you'd look and it'd be $400, for something that looked like it should be $40. Specifically on that, these people, there's a lot less of them now, right? They've I don't know if they've moved on or they've partied out and they're older now. It's still there. There's a look and feel, and to some extent, it's a little fun. When you go to Tulum, you dress a little bit differently, and it's just a different vibe. But that sort of vibe has decreased here over the last year or two. It really peaked again during COVID. A lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of time were spending significant time in the area and buying a lot of clothes and jewelry and partying. But I think that's died down, and it's turning more and more into a more diverse community, right? So you've had tons and tons of Mexicans from other parts of the country moving in, white collar and blue collar. You've got, still expats, foreigners from around the world. There's a lot of Italians there. There's French there, Americans, Canadians. And so, these kind of spikes of craziness or of, uniqueness are starting to level out as Tulum becomes a late stage teenager, I guess, to go back to our previous analogy.
Okay, so basically, in summation, you sort of think, and that's a good comment you just said to end on or summarize on, but you think Tulum is going through the ugly, zit-faced teenager phase right now, but that it will grow out of it, and this is a temporary thing, and that the future is looking positive for several reasons, and you're still bullish.
Yeah, I guess I'd say yes, but I'd put a caveat there. I think and I don't have children, but I have a lot of friends that do, and I think maybe there's a time when you look at your 16-year-old and say, I'm not sure they're going to get there, where I'm trying to get them. You never are 100% sure, right? And of course, I'm not 100% sure on Tulum either. There's a lot of things that I don't like that have happened there. There is no doubt about that. There's no denying that. That being said, the core of what it is and why it's special, the nature and things I talked about, but there's also this Mayan culture connection there. The Mayan people are there. There's a food culture. There's a wellness and yoga culture that goes back many, many years. All of that is still there and makes it a really special place. And so, I'm optimistic. I've seen the good and the bad there over the years. I think there's going to be a self-correction because it's in the best interest of everybody for a correction to take place. I don't know if it's going to take, another 6 months or a year or 3 years.
Well, I was just going to say, we need to do a podcast literally in a year from today and sort of discuss what's changed since the first time we talked about this
Yeah,
topic.
I see, and I would encourage people to keep reading. Read Mexico News Daily. We write about it a lot. There are those green shoots of sort of getting back on the right track. Taxis, there's now been authorized this whole 150 golf cart taxis. So there's some competition in the taxi world. This national park that's been open, there were some growing pains with that. They're now improving some of those things. The infrastructure is getting better and better. The infrastructure on electricity, paving roads, water, internet, which was so far behind, so far lagging, is starting to catch up. So there's a lot of reasons for hope, but there is reason for concern still. And so it's something to keep an eye on. And really keep reading about and go see for yourself. But it's important to be informed for when you arrive. Otherwise, you're going to have a little bit of
In
shock.
for a shock, totally.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Well, listen, man, I really appreciate your sort of insight. You've changed my mind on a couple things. Yeah, man, I've enjoyed it. I definitely learned a little bit.
Good conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm heading back to Tulum anytime soon, but we'll see.
At least keep reading about it. Don't rule
Absolutely.
it out.
Absolutely.
All right. Good conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
George.
Travis.
Take care.